Hello, and welcome to my video on an introduction to sampling. Sampling. What is sampling? It is the process of selecting units. So selecting people or organizations from a population. So I do have some pictures to explain what is going on here. I just Googled this, sampling from a population. There are some very nice pictures here where you can see, and we're going to define all of this today. Um, but a population is your bigger sort of the whole group that you are interested in investigating. So, for an example, let's say the population is all the fourth year educational students, and you want to ask them something, you want to research something. Now, your population would be all the fourth year educational students, let's say at the University of Pretoria. But now, if you are going to, let's say, interview them or send a questionnaire to a couple of them, you take a sample. There are different ways to draw the sample. That is a different video. But you just take a small sample from the population. So why do you do that? Um, the population is usually big. Let's say all the fourth year students in the Faculty of Education, it might be 1,500 people. And especially if you use qualitative approaches like interviews, you can't interview 1,000 plus people. Um, and even if you send out questionnaires, not everyone will return them, or you might not have email addresses for everyone in the population to send the questionnaire to everyone. So we typically don't work with the whole population when doing a study. We take a small sample. So the population is the entire group you're interested in, and you will just take a small sample where for those group you might send a questionnaire, you might interview them, you might do a focus group interview, whatever the case may be. Okay, so sampling, it's the process of selecting the units you are going to work with. Like I said, there's a different video for the different ways of doing this, sampling people. You saw what the sample was, a small group that you'll be using. It might not be small. We are going to look at sample size later on in a separate video. But basically for quantitative studies, because it's things like questionnaires, you usually have large samples because you can send a questionnaire to 200 to 300 people and get 200 or 300 questionnaires back. So sample size, oh, it's actually the next one. Sample size for quantitative studies is usually very large, and sample size for qualitative studies is usually much smaller because qualitative studies is usually things like interviews, and you might just interview 5 or 10 people. Okay, so you take a sample from the population. We've talked about this. And what is your sampling frame? Well, let's look at my example. If you are interested in all the fourth year students of the Faculty of Education, your sample frame would be the class list. And then from the class list, you would draw some students. Again, you might ask, how do you draw them? Do you randomly pick some? Is there a different way of picking who's going to be in your sample? There are many different ways. That is why the way we pick them, so the sampling procedure, is discussed in a separate video. It's also separate videos for the way we do it for quantitative studies and the way we do it for qualitative studies, because there are vast differences in how you would select your respondents or participants, um, depending on whether your study is quantitative or qualitative. But we will get to that. Let me just mention, when we talk about participants, I only see the word participants here. There should have been respondents slash participants. Maybe I should just fix it. Okay, it still fits in the page. For quantitative studies, we talk about respondents. These are usually people filling in, let's say, a questionnaire, respondents. And for qualitative study, we usually talk about participants because they sort of participate because you interview them. They are participating in something. Whereas for quantitative studies, they are more just responding to a questionnaire. So we do talk about respondents in quantitative studies and participants in qualitative studies. So let me save that change. Okay, and then thank you so much for watching the video on an introduction to sampling.